Hello, hello, and welcome back to my Artacular classroom. I'm Emily. I am feeling the springtime, and as always, I'm feeling cute baby animals. So I'm gonna be walking you through this little watercolor chickie. It's really cute. I have some sparkly paints that I used on it. If you don't have that, obviously you don't have to do that, but it can be a little fun. This is a beginner tutorial and it involves no drawing. Yay! So if you're not into drawing or not confident with your drawing skills, no need to panic. Yay. And I believe that's it. Let's get to it. Alright, so before I'm getting started here, I'm just going to walk you through the materials and kind of show you what this looks like, although you can't really see it super well. I have this glittery paint that when I turn on the light, love that. So I'm starting off with just a simple watercolor palette. This brand is Color Swell, which I'll try to link in the description. Obviously I have my piece of paper. I'm making this a card, so I folded it in half. And as you can see, it's very small, so I'm just gonna work with the small brush that Color Swell provides. I have 2 jars of water. One is clean, which I'm using right now with a larger brush to paint water over the surface of the paper. I'm also being careful not to make it too much water. I don't want there to be pools of water on the paper, but I do want it to be shiny. Now, if you look at the water in the light, you can sort of see that for the most part, the paper is just shiny. However, that spot right there maybe is a little bit of pooling. There's kind of a pool of water right there, so I'd want to be a little bit careful in that spot, but for the most part, I have the right amount of water. So I'm just going to start by painting a little circle for the head and a larger oval underneath it for the body. Wasn't quite happy with the shape of that, so I softened up those 2 curves right there and turned it into a little bit more of a bean shape rather than 2 ovals stacked on top of each other. Okay, now it wasn't quite fuzzy enough. The water dried a little bit. So I've grabbed my larger brush. It just has a little bit of clean water on it, and I'm just barely scraping over the edge of my yellow shape to allow the water to bleed into the surrounding area so that I can hopefully get a softer edge. As I'm waiting for that to dry, I want to kind of start working in some of the details while it's still wet. So yellow can be hard to make shadows for. I'm just going to add a little bit of orange to some of that yellow. You could also use red, but be careful about the amount you use. And kind of dab it into the area where I want the wing to be. Also a little bit underneath the head and a little bit at the bottom of the body. Now it wasn't quite soft enough, so once again with a clean, damp brush, I'm just doing a little bit of scrubbing around the edges of the shape where I want it to bleed into the yellow more. And now it's nice and soft. Doing the same thing to the bottom of the body. And then I was feeling like the chest wasn't quite soft enough, so once again I added a little bit of yellow there and then some clean water to fuzz that out. Okay, now moving on to the half eggshells, while I let that dry, I am going to start with wet on wet, but only for 1 layer. Once I have a little bit of the color down, I'm going to do wet on dry. And I wanted these half shells to be pink, so I grabbed some of the red and I added a lot of water because as you know, red can be a very strong color. So I went quite diluted there, and that'll give me some control over the color. First, I'm just gonna paint a little U next to the chick. That's gonna be the bottom half shell. You can fill in that shape, which is basically just a half circle. And then with a little bit of space between it and the last half shell, I'm going to paint a backwards C, and that's going to be the top half shell. Once again, I'm going to turn that into sort of like a crescent moon shape and fill that in. But I am trying to leave a little bit of space in between the top shell and the bottom shell. Now here I wasn't quite happy with the shape of the head, but my paper had mostly dried. So I did need to put down a little bit of clean water and then add a little bit of yellow to the back to make that shape more how I wanted it. But note, you have to be careful about putting water back down on dry paint. If you work it a little too much with your brush, you can end up with cauliflowers. And if you don't know what that is, I can't quite show you at this moment, but I will show you in a little bit. All right, and at this point, it's ready to dry. So if you are drying your paper, just pause the video and start it back up again when you are ready. All right, gonna start on the grass now. Once again, I'm gonna start with wet on wet. So I put some water down on the paper. Not too much, just enough to make it shiny. Being careful not to go over areas that I've already painted too much. And I like to start this off with a lighter green. So I'm mixing some yellow with some green. That's gonna be like my base color. And then later I'll go back over those with some wet on dry, some different values of green. Also want to bring that grass up to the sides of the egg so that it doesn't look like the grass is just kind of disappearing. And while I'm letting that dry, I can start working on the sky. So when I'm doing watercolor, a lot of the time I'll kind of bounce around from like the bottom of the painting up to the top of the painting or something like that, whatever makes the most sense with the process to allow myself time to let things dry, but also so that I'm not just sitting there waiting forever because I'm impatient and that results in some interesting things. Okay. Anyway, so the sky is wet on wet and I am kind of concentrating the blue up at the top and then using just clean water to sort of drag the color down and let it lighten as I go towards the bottom of the page. Once again, I'm avoiding the eggs. And I also like to kind of dab some little streaks of water in there. This is going to create cauliflowers, which you'll see a little more clearly in a bit. But I like the way the water kind of disperses the paint and creates sort of like a funky cloud texture. So once again, as I'm waiting for that to dry and as I'm sort of waiting for the grass to dry, as long as I'm careful and I don't touch the green, I'm okay to move back to the eggs. And now I'm going to do some wet on dry blending. So I'm still using that diluted pink. I put down some strokes in the areas where I want the shadow to be the strongest, and then with a damp, clean brush, I just do a little bit of scrubbing on the edge of that shape that I just painted down. It's going to allow the paint to bleed into the areas where I want it to be lighter and create a gradient. Now I can also keep dabbing some of the red into the areas where I want the shadow to be stronger. As long as it's wet, it should hopefully kind of bleed itself out. Now adding a little bit of black to my pink, I do have to be careful about this because black can be a very intrusive color and it often has some sort of tint of another color to it. Like there are bluer blacks, there are browner blacks. So you do want to be kind of careful about how much you add there. But adding a little bit of black to the pink, I just create a little jagged line up at the top of my shape. And I could already tell that that was going to dry too light, so I wanted to kind of jump the gun a bit and put some more black in there. I went a little intense. This is going to look really interesting for a moment here, and then I will make it look nicer. I'm going to move on to the top half shell with some little sideways zigzags, and still trying to leave just a little crack of white in between the two half shells. All right, so now I'm going back over those little blotchy black dots that I had and blending them out with just a damp, clean brush. Most likely I'm gonna need to do another layer of that later, but for right now, that's looking pretty good, and I can just keep working on the eggs if I need to and move on to other areas. I'm basically just gonna repeat those steps over and over again for the eggs. Now, if you look at the sky, that's where we see that cauliflower. The top of the sky, you can kind of see how it almost has that like crackly texture up there. Again, I really love that for clouds. All right, and there's a little too much water on the paper. There's not really anywhere that I can move on to for the wet on dry, so it's time to dry. If you need to dry, pause the video and start it back up again when you're ready to go. All right, so I'm just looking for places where I can work that's dry enough. I'm gonna add that second layer of darkness to the inside of the eggshell. And I was kind of feeling like maybe I want it to be a little bit darker at the inside of the egg and a little lighter towards the outside of the egg. So I'm concentrating the darker stuff right there at the edge of the shell, the edge of the crack, I guess. And then using a little bit of clean water to allow it to hopefully create a gradient so that it lightens up as it reaches the top of the egg. All right, and now I am ready to start working more on the grass because it's looking pretty dry. So that green that Color Swell provides is a really nice, rich blue green. I'm going to use that with maybe just a little bit of yellow to create sort of like a more medium and more neutral green, and then I will do a darker blue-green for the shadows. So I am going to start working in some blades of grass. I'm keeping them sparse, kind of separated, with a lot of space between them for now, and then I'm going back in with some slightly more diluted paint to create some lighter blades. Alright, and while I'm waiting for that, I can start on the chick's face. So I'm going to paint in an eye, and I think I don't do it on this one, but in the example over there on the left, you can see that there's a little white dot left in the eye. I think I tried to put it there, and then just didn't for whatever reason. So you can do it, or you can not. And if you accidentally cover it over with black, that's fine. And now I'm using my fun Renaissance colors, color shift sparkly paints here to do the beak. These colors are really fun, but they can be a little strange in how they show in different lighting. I suppose all glitter paint is kind of like that. So you have to go a little bit thick with these. You can do some blending with them though. Which is why I started with a stroke in the areas where there's some shadow. And then I grabbed some clean water and kind of blended it out like I did all the other wet on dry blending. Now it's kind of counterintuitive. Glitter shines and captures light, so why on earth am I putting it in the shadows? Well, just the way the paint is, it somehow kind of creates a medium tone value. And it looks darker than I want it to in certain lights. So I found that it works really well as a shadow, and then as you kind of tilt it and move around, then you can see the glitter and it has this really nice effect. But otherwise, I'm not usually happy using it as a highlighter. As I mentioned, the colors are a little odd. They're not very pure, which is why they're called color shifts. So I did add a little bit of orange to the beak there because I wanted it to be a more pure orange that still shines. And then I moved on to the shadows of the grass. So mixing a new green with some blue in it, this is going to help me get a slightly darker green and also kind of tint the shadows a little bit. And then I'm just going to weave in some little darker blades of grass here and there throughout. If I feel like I need to kind of create a cast shadow on the grass, then I can sort of blend some of that stuff out, let it dry, add some more blades later. And now I'm going to start adding some little details to the eggs. Now, as you can see, when it's quite diluted, like there's not very much paint on there, it's really faint and really light. So I like to just load my brush up with it as much as I can and then put the designs down. Sometimes if you're finding that when you make strokes, the paint is kind of diluted, try dabbing your brush into it, and sometimes it sort of concentrates the paint into the area. And once again, I wanted to add some of that green sparkly, but again, it's not a very pure green, so mixing it in with some of that green paint helps a little bit. It's not the fault of the colors, they're meant to kind of have multiple different colors in different lights. I really like them, I think they're really fun. They just were a bit of a learning curve for me. I wasn't happy with them the first time I used them until I kind of figured out how I liked them. Just as details, kind of thick and concentrated in the colors, and then also usually in shadows or darker areas rather than highlights. Alright, so then I'm just going to let it dry. If you need to do that, pause the video, start it up again when you're ready. And lastly, I'm going to lift a little bit of paint out of the top of the chick's head. It just ended up kind of intense, an intense yellow, not quite what I wanted. So I'm putting water back down on the paper, and I'm sort of scrubbing some of that yellow out, dabbing my brush off in between every stroke. And as you can see, my brush is kind of picking some of the yellow back up off the paper, and it's lightening up that section. But this can be really tricky because once again, you can end up with cauliflowers. So I recommend kind of being patient with this. Maybe allowing yourself to do a few layers if needed. Wanted to soften up that area of the sky because it's kind of it looks like the chick has a little like puffy hat on its head, but I didn't do a very good job, so it's gonna remain with a puffy hat. Again, trying to lift a little bit out of the wing. Now, as I'm trying to do a little bit of controlling over like how strong that shape is, because obviously the chick is not made of rubber, like I don't want it to gleam in the sun. I am adding a little bit more yellow because like I said, that lifting technique can be kind of strong. If it even works, it doesn't always work. So adding just a little bit of yellow back into there, kind of blending it around the lighter area so that I still have a light area, but it's softer. Et voila, it is done. It just needs to dry. Alright, so hopefully that worked out for you, but if it didn't, no worries, it's okay. Watercolor is incredibly hard. It takes a lot of learning, practice, frustration, tears, the like. But if you're one of the lucky ones and it did turn out well for you, congratulations, you now have a cute little springtime card or a little frameable piece that you can put up during this time of year. Whatever you want. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop them below. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it and hope to see you on the next one. Bye!